name is Desiree Rodriguez, and for my final research project topic, I chose Asperger syndrome. So what is Asperger syndrome? According to Autism Society Organization, it is a type of neurobiological developmental disorder that mostly affects and develops in young children and teenagers. This specific type of autism disorder was actually discovered by a Vietnamese pediatrician in the 1940s. The pediatrician at the time was actually studying the behavior Asperger syndrome in young boys. So there is a difference between Asperger syndrome and autism spectrum disorder. The two are not to be confused with each other, just because even though they share, they're similar in the sense that they both are developmental disorders, and Asperger syndrome falls under the ASD category. The symptoms are a little bit more different. So, for example, children with Asperger syndrome tend to display and exhibit more functional cognitive skills, whereas children with ASD don't really show these skills effectively. The characteristics of Asperger syndrome include things like aloofness, lack of empathy, not understanding or being unaware of typical social rules and norms, and lack of eye contact when interacting with others. It's not that children with Asperger syndrome don't have empathy, it's just that they can't read other people's body language, and just they can't really understand their tone. So therefore they're not able to associate any emotions with how another person is talking. Symptoms that children may show include unusual speech. This includes talking in a very high-pitched or low tone, or almost in a deep or robotic voice. They tend to change the way they speak very frequently. Children with Asperger syndrome also lack the understanding of body gestures and language, unless they are physically told how the other person is feeling, or what the other person is exhibiting. They can't read body language the way that another person would. They're also very hypersensitive to lights or sounds, and as well as becoming upset when there are slight changes to their routine. Children with Asperger syndrome, at a very young age, they are either put into a routine by their parents or they create one on their own. So once that routine is made, it cannot be changed. Because what happens is when the routine is changed slightly, for example, if bathroom time is at 5 o'clock and instead for some reason they can't go to the bathroom, at that specific time like they always do, they will get very upset because they don't like change. They've become so accustomed to their routine, and that's why. Another example would be like my brother. He has Asperger syndrome. Ever since he was a child, he has had a very specific routine. Dinner time would always be at 6 o'clock for him. He cannot eat dinner an hour early or an hour after. During dinner time, he would have to go to the bathroom. Even if he doesn't actually physically need to go to the bathroom, he has to complete that action. If not, he will become very fidgety, irritated, just very upset. So my main question for this topic is Asperger syndrome a genetic disorder? There has been a lot of talk about how Asperger syndrome can be, inherited from parent to offspring. However, there's not a lot of research that has been conducted that accurately details if it is a genetic disorder, and if it is, what parent it comes from. Based on research studies that were conducted, it's theorized that Asperger's syndrome can be a genetic disorder. In a journal article called Behavioral, Cognitive, and Neuromarkers of Asperger's Syndrome by Fernaz Faridi and Reza Khosrabadi, it is mentioned how Asperger's syndrome can be inherited from parent to offspring. In this case, it's thought that fathers and their children share some kind of connection when it comes to Asperger's syndrome. Essentially, this connection is more behavioral. It's discussed how the father and child share a connection when it comes to Asperger's syndrome. Quote, AS children mostly have similar behavioral traits as their parents, end of quote. In this case, it's the father. Mothers, during the study that was conducted in this article, it was shown that mothers have no association or connection with their children as far as sharing any behavioral traits. The specific study that was conducted that this journal article includes was essentially how cognitive tasks had displayed. It was essentially how cognitive tasks had displayed a demonstrated and prolonged latency that has been reported for AS children as well as their fathers, but not their mothers. Essentially what this means is that fathers and Asperger's syndrome children share the same amount of delayness when it comes to completing any task that requires cognitive skills. An article that was created and published by AAAS Science Organization, Autistic Children May Inherit DNA Mutations from Their Fathers, by Matt Warren, discusses the discovery that researchers have made about autism as far as it being a genetic disorder. In this case, it was discovered that there's no specific gene that causes autism. Rather, there are multiple variants of a DNA that contribute to the disorder. The variations of the variants in the DNA that encode the proteins are more likely to be inherited from fathers who may not even possess having autism or Asperger's syndrome. John Sabat, a geneticist at University of California, conducted a study pertaining to the genome sequences of autism in families. And it was found in his study that researchers found that mothers pass only 1/2 of their variants to their children who do have autism. However, those variants that are passed from mother to child have no association or connection of autism at all. They're just passing plain variant DNAs. However, fathers possessed and passed down 50% of their variants, and those variants of DNA are actually connected to Asperger's syndrome or autism in general. So it was concluded that fathers do in fact possess the variant DNA that can result in autism. Based on research conducted, while Asperger's syndrome is a subcategory of autism spectrum disorder, the two are different in the sense of characteristics they possess. It can be concluded that children with Asperger's syndrome are more likely to have inherited the variant DNA from the father's side, as the father is now known to carry the variants that can be associated to autism. Unfortunately, there is no cure or permanent treatment for Asperger's syndrome and autism in general, as it's a It's a neurological developmental disorder, so there's no actual medicine to, to prevent this and permanently cure it. However, there's many steps that parents take to help their children who do have Asperger's syndrome or ASD. And many of those steps include proper counseling and therapies. Essentially, these therapies help children with autism and Asperger's syndrome kind of adjust and adapt their life to it. It helps improve their communication skills, as cognitive and communication is the most affected when it comes to children who have Asperger's syndrome. And essentially, these therapies just help children with Asperger's syndrome live a better life. And below are my references for what I used for the project. Thank you.